Let's just go back to our correspondent Mark Stone, who is at the White House and has been reading this agreement between the Ukrainians and the American delegations there in Jeddah. And, well, I mean, that gets to the heart of this. Even if there's a ceasefire, Mark, there are going to be really difficult negotiations about who gets what. And as Lesia Vasylenko was saying there, well, you know, if we're going to give territory up, this is about the Constitution, changing the Constitution. All sorts of difficulties and hard, painful decisions lie ahead.
Yeah, the really hard part is way down the line. But I think, you know, the way the Trump administration is working this, the way that they work so many different issues, is to seize a moment, to grab a headline, and the headline certainly is that we are talking now, literally, about a 30-day pause in fighting, a ceasefire. Certainly, that is what the Ukrainians are willing to have in a joint statement, a ceasefire. The sky's quiet, the sea quiet, the front line quiet, crucially, the front line quiet as well, as Zelensky has framed it. But as you say, the really difficult part is down the line. But if Donald Trump, if President Trump can get that momentum going, can get that headline in the evening news tonight, he would be very pleased indeed. But so many questions are unanswered, and the focus clearly now on the Russians and whether they would agree to any of these points. And certainly the sense, given what the Ukrainian MP just outlined to you there, there's so much of that you can't imagine for 1 minute Russia would agree to. What Russia does want is a pause. They too would like a pause in fighting, and so they may well agree in the immediate term to this 30-day pause, because it's useful to them. It's useful to any military. If you know you're not going to be fired at, then you won't fire back. You can regroup. So in a purely strategic sense, it's clearly very useful for both sides. But that's when, as I say, the really tricky part comes in. And it's worth saying as well, Mark, that you know, the Ukrainians were in a bind here because America had them over a barrel, because we know that they had stopped all military assistance, all intelligence as well had been paused. And so they kind of had to agree to anything in Jeddah if they wanted to get that going again. They have agreed to this joint communique, and as a consequence of that, we know that both intelligence and weapons flows to Ukraine have restarted again, as Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, said, with immediate effect. The last point I'd make, Mark, is that the minerals deal is still clearly something that the Americans want to sign. It's due to be signed at any point now. I mean, we could literally hear that it has been signed by surrogates of both Zelensky and Trump. But of course, with that too, there are problems, there are flaws within it. It would make Ukraine effectively an economic colony of the United States. The Americans argue that it is in itself a security guarantee because it puts American contractors on the ground in Ukraine. Would they be kind of some sort of a human shield? That seems a very odd thing to do. But it would also give America a long-term stake in Ukraine's future. But then again, it gets you straight back to the same point. What would the Russians make of all that? So all the balls now in Russia's court, firmly.
Yeah, OK, Mark, thank you very much indeed. And it was Marco Rubio who said that the ball is now in Russia's court. So let's just have a listen to what the American Secretary of State said in Saudi Arabia a short time ago.
Well, as has been clear from his first day as president, even as a candidate, President Trump is a president. He wants to be a president of peace. His goal in this entire process has been to bring about an end to this war. It's a terrible war, a costly war, a bloody war. And his number one interest is ending this war once and for all. Today, we made an offer that the Ukrainians have accepted, which is to enter into a ceasefire and into immediate negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's enduring and sustainable and accounts for their interests, their security, their ability to prosper as a nation. I want to personally thank, we both want to thank the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, His Majesty, for hosting us, for making this possible. They've been instrumental in this process, and we're very grateful to them for hosting us here today. And hopefully we'll take this offer now to the Russians. And we hope that they'll say yes, to peace. The ball is now in their court. And but again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear, that they share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic kind of meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together. But we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end, what type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security and prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this, the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now that shuttle diplomacy continues. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side. I will talk to my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers in the next couple of days. We have the NATO Secretary General in the White House on Thursday, and we'll take the process forward from there. So, as a result of that, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid and on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward, and that's effective immediately.
All right, your colleagues have chosen 3 questioners. Let's start with Alex Marquardt of CNN.
Thank you. Several questions on the ceasefire. We understood that coming into this was a Ukrainian proposal for a partial ceasefire. How did this become an American proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire? And to be clear, you're talking about a complete ceasefire across the front line, not just the aerial and maritime ceasefire that the Ukrainians proposed. And then finally, how do you expect to take this to the Russians? Is it Mr. Witkoff, who we understand is heading to Moscow later this week? Will he deliver that to Putin? Will it be President Trump to President Putin? Will it be you and your counterparts? How will that actually happen and when?
Well, on the first point, your question is yes. That's the offer. The offer is to stop the shooting. The goal here is the only way out to end this war is to negotiate out of it. There's no military solution to this war. The solution to this war and the way to end it and to achieve the president's objective of peace is to negotiate. But before you can negotiate, you have to stop shooting at each other. And that's what the president has wanted to see, and that's the commitment we got today from the Ukrainian side, their willingness to do that. Obviously, now that'll be delivered to the Russians. It'll be delivered to them directly through multiple channels, meaning not only will they obviously see it, it'll be communicated to them through our diplomatic channels, through conversations and other methods, but they'll obviously be well aware. And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree. So the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides.
Look, there's been all kinds of discussions in terms of different types of ceasefires. You know, there was the deal in terms of grain moving years ago. There's been discussion of halting aerial attacks on each other's infrastructure. The president has made it clear and certainly made it clear to us that all fighting needs to stop. And the Ukrainians have agreed to that proposal. They're ready for peace. And now we'll take that to the Russians and get their response.
Right, we're joined now by Jim Townsend, a former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for European and NATO policy. Thank you very much for being with us. And, well, there we are, Marco Rubio saying important steps towards an enduring peace. How important do you think it could be?
Well, I think it could be very important if things go according to plan. If the Russians accept this and they sit down and they come up with a way ahead, that's great. But I think all of us who know foreign policy and know the past history, these things take a long time. There's a lot of bumps in the road. I don't want to dismiss what's happened. I think this is really great. But as the Russians said, I think earlier today, no one should put on rose-colored glasses in looking at this situation here. And they said that before any announcement. So the Russians, the Russians don't do things for free. And I think it's going to be a real test of the Russians to see if they're going to go ahead and accept it or if they're going to put some qualifications on it.
Well, what are your thoughts on that? This is an initial interim 30-day ceasefire being proposed. Do you think that the Russians will accept it or something like it?
Well, I mean, that's a great question because it goes to Russian motivation. Why should they do this? Because, one of the things that's happened now is because the Ukrainians agreed to this, now the pause is lifted. So the intelligence and the assistance is going to go back to Ukraine. So maybe the Russians say, look, we're not going to accept this if you've lifted the pause. Put the pause back on, and then maybe we'll accept this. I mean, there's all kinds of tricks that the Russians could throw out there. We're going to just have to see. Keeping in mind, like I said, the Russians don't do anything for free. And if they see something in their favor by going along with this, only then will they agree to this. They're not going to do this as a favor to Trump.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is what we were talking to a Ukrainian MP just a moment ago who was making 2 points. One is that there's nothing really in this agreement in Jeddah, and it is early days, of course, as you say, but nothing really about what kind of security guarantees the Americans are prepared to offer, if any. And she was making the point that that is very important to Ukraine.
That's right. And I'm sure a lot of what this was discussed today was about security guarantees, because that's one of the most important things for Zelensky. He doesn't want to sell his country down the road and having no security guarantee of any type there. We know the European nations want to have agreed to send forces. We know the Russians don't like that. So there's a lot of hard talk ahead, but you got to start. This is a start if the Russians agree. And then let's just see what happens. But let's also be very practical about this and know that, like I said, Russians don't do things for free. They feel that things are going in their favor anyway. So there's be something in it for them.
Well, that's an important point. And just finally, Steve Witkoff, who appears to be a very important man in the Trump administration, is, we're told, on his way to Moscow. How important could that be? Because he now has the job, or it seems he has the job, of trying to persuade the Russians to move on this.
That's right. And, it's interesting that Marco Rubio said that there will be multiple approaches or multiple avenues to deliver to the Russians this idea of a ceasefire. So Witkoff is going to be the person doing it, in person. But I'm wondering if there might be a phone call from Trump to Putin or other kinds of communications made to prepare the way for Witkoff to go there. I don't think it's totally on his back, but this is the first big test of the Russians, and the Russians haven't had to make any concessions. They've been given a lot of gifts over the past couple of weeks from the U.S. And so this is the first time they've been asked to sign up to something. So let's see if they do it.
Okay, Jim, thank you very much for coming on. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Right, joining me now is our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, who is in Greenland, interestingly enough, and how beautiful does that look? And where elections are taking place. So, Dominic, we'll talk about Greenland if we get time, but I just wonder your thoughts really on this agreement that's been made in Jeddah, an interim 30-day ceasefire, and Marco Rubio now saying effectively the ball is in Moscow's court.
Yeah, Mark, it is an extraordinary turn of events, and I think we're all entitled to feel a certain amount of whiplash, really, because the direction of events had been very much against Ukraine, and it had looked like that Donald Trump had almost switched sides in this conflict. He had instructed his diplomats to vote effectively on the Russian and its allies' side in the UN, and he had switched off military aid and intelligence support to the Ukrainians, to the point where actually some pretty seasoned observers, not conspiracy theorists at all, were beginning to wonder whether Donald Trump was actually a Russian asset, wondering what Vladimir Putin had on him. It now looks as though he's prepared to turn the tap back on in terms of that military aid and intelligence support, and obviously that's absolutely crucial to the Ukrainians, and he's done so in response, it seems, to the Ukrainians agreeing to a ceasefire deal. It seems as though the Ukrainians came to the party to these talks with a ceasefire deal. The Americans have built on that, and they seem to be confident now that there is the possibility of a more substantial and significant ceasefire deal than the Ukrainians even were talking about. And so we're now in this position where Marco Rubio is talking about the ball being in Vladimir Putin's court. So in a sense, it is all eyes now on Russia. We'll have to see what Vladimir Putin does next. I think there will be a sigh of relief around the world that there does seem to be progress now in this diplomatic initiative that Donald Trump certainly initiated and has come under considerable fire for being perceived as not an honest broker in it. I think people will now have to revise their view of him, and things are moving quickly. But I think we'll have to temper it with some qualifications here. First of all, it's very unclear as to whether Vladimir Putin actually wants to have peace at this stage. He clearly thinks that the war is going in his direction, and over the weekend his forces do seem to have made a lot of progress expelling the Ukrainians from that enclave and Kursk that they pushed into. It looks as though the Russians are now moving against them in a military sense. Momentum seems to still be with the Russians in a military sense, both there and in the east of Ukraine. And Vladimir Putin's made it very clear that he still wants to see Ukraine effectively destroyed as a country and absorbed into Russia. He believes it has no right to exist as a sovereign nation. He believes it should be part of Russia. And he's been put under no pressure at all. There have been no demands really made of him to make concessions. The other important point to make, Mark, is that on his side are some very seasoned negotiators, extremely experienced, and against them we have Marco Rubio, Mike Waltz and Steve Witkoff, who, it has to be said, with the best in the will in the world, are not up to them, not up to the Russians' calibre in terms of high-level negotiating.
Dominic, no time for a Greenland question, but we'll talk to you tomorrow maybe. Many thanks for that. So movement on Ukraine and Russia. Sophie Ridge is next.